What is going on, guys? We're going to give it 30 seconds or so to let some people tune in, and then we're going to get into the show. Guys, as you're tuning in, drop me a message below in the comment. Let me know how things are going for you, how training's going, if you got anything exciting coming up. And then also, I want to let you guys all know before we get into the show, we're going to be running a masterclass on how to get physically fight ready on Sunday this week. If you want in, DM me, I'm in, and we will get you the registration form. So if you want into the masterclass, how to get fight ready, DM me, I'm in, and we will get you the registration form as soon as we get off the podcast. First fight coming up May 24th. That's super exciting. Looking forward to hearing how that goes. And guys, you know what? We're going to get into it right away. And what I want to reinforce with you before we start out, today we're talking about training like the pros. And we're going to get into it right away, and I'll let you guys know what we're getting into. So 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the number one show for athletes looking to gain an edge on their opponents and build their dream careers in sport. I am your host, Kenny Dusseault, and today we are talking about training like Khabib. Now, before we get into it, I'm going to really reinforce with you, this is not going to be like a Khabib strength and conditioning breakdown or anything like that. But the reason that I titled this Training Like Khabib is because one of the most common things I'll see on posts that I make or conversations that I'll have is guys will use the argument of, well, what you're saying is wrong because Khabib does this, or because, Floyd Mayweather does this, or because this person does this, or this person does that. And so I'm going to break that down a little bit. So I had one specifically that commented on a post I made just the other day talking about lifting weights and how lifting weights has a lot of benefit for fighters. And the guy basically commented and said, well, Khabib only ever did his endurance work and then used very, very light weights and bands. So, we need to train like that because, and again, I'm not saying the exact words from the comment, but essentially the point was like, yeah, lifting weights is important, but don't make it too heavy or too slow. And then, guys like Khabib only trained with super light weights and bands. And the thing when I hear comments like that, and this is no shot at this person because I get comments like that almost every day. But the thing when I hear comments like that is, guys, you don't know how the pros trained. You don't know how the pros trained. Like this person saying, oh, Khabib trained like this. It's like, were you there? Probably not, right? And within a quick Google search, it was probably the third thing I found on Google. It was an interview with Khabib where he talked about lifting weights. Said he lifted weights 3 times a week for strength and conditioning. He said, he didn't like that so much, which I understand. I don't expect any fighters to like lifting more than they like their skills training. That'd be nuts. But he said he did that 3 times a week. And the main important thing was he wasn't doing enough to ever take away from his skills training, which if you ever listen to the videos that I post is exactly what I'm saying too. I have a lot of people that will listen to the things that I post and they somehow think that when I say, hey, you should lift weights 2 to 3 times a week, that means that I'm saying you should only lift weights and never do your skills training or anything like that. That's just not the case. So like my exact focus with my athletes, my exact focus with every person I work with is 2 to 3 strength sessions per week to increase your athletic ability while focusing on your skills training. Because if you don't do your skills training, you're not going to get better at the sport. And if you're a great athlete, but you have no skills when it comes to the sport, that's going to be a problem. But the main point and why I titled this episode Training Like Khabib is because if you watch a couple of videos, you don't know how Khabib trains unless you were there or how he trained within his career. And from watching that quick interview that I found, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know how he trained either. But what I do know is a lot of people seem to think guys like him, and you can take out his name and put in literally any other name you want there. But a lot of people seem to think that they know how these guys were training. They know the ins and outs of their schedule because maybe they watched a couple of videos or watched a couple of interviews, and they'll be like, yeah, this guy didn't weight train. And like literally I Google searched, did Khabib lift weights? And I think it was like the 4th or 5th result, maybe. There was an interview about him talking about how he lifted weights 3 times a week through his career. So again, I'm not going to pretend I know what those sessions look like, or I'm going to, sit here and say that he was doing it the same way that I do it with my people. I don't know. But my point is, just by watching a video or just by listening to an interview, you don't know how these guys train, right? So stop having it in your head that it's like, well, I saw a video from Floyd Mayweather one time where he said he didn't like lifting weights. So that means Floyd Mayweather never touched a weight in his life and all he ever did was box and run. Maybe that's the case, but you don't know. So instead of trying to model yourself after what these guys are doing, instead of sitting here and being like, well, Khabib one time said he didn't like lifting weights, so that means I'm never going to touch a weight again. Sit here and ask yourself, what can lifting weights actually do for me? What can being stronger actually do for me? And when you see the benefits of strength training, instead of being like, whoa, Khabib didn't like strength training, so I shouldn't strength train, be like, oh, well, if it has all of these benefits, I should probably start. But that brings me to the next point. And the next point, especially with a guy like Khabib, the next point is, guys, you shouldn't be trying to model your training after the high-level pros anyway, because you aren't them. And I'm not saying that you can't be them one day, but like as an example with Khabib, this dude was wrestling bears in the mountains when he was 9 years old. There's videos of it. So if you're 18 getting into MMA, being like, oh, well, Khabib trained like this, so I should train like that, you're not going to survive, because this dude was wrestling bears when he was 9 years old. So if he was wrestling bears as a child, then the chances are his training methods are not going to transfer over to be just effective for everyone, because this dude is just built different. And my point with that too is not looking at the way other people trained, because the other thing about him is, if you know much about his backstory, and again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know the ins and outs of every detail, but listening to interviews and watching some videos about the guy, he was basically born and raised to be a UFC champion. So like from extremely, extremely, extremely young ages, he was training like a savage. He was competing. He was doing all these things. Like he was born to become a UFC champion. The chances are you weren't. And if you're not, that doesn't mean you can't become one. That doesn't mean that you can't see success in a sport. But what it means is you should not be trying to train like him, because he probably has, I can't even begin to say how many more years of experience training. So even if his training methods aren't optimal, he's going to rise above you simply because of the way he was raised. You get what I mean? So again, you need to find the physical advantages, not just trying to model after what guys like that are doing. And the physical advantages come from learning more about training, learning more about how methods can affect you, not just comparing them and being like, well, this guy did this. Because first, you don't know what that guy was actually doing. Second, you are not that guy. The same one I always hear comparisons with is Floyd Mayweather. Oh, well, he ran 10 miles a day or whatever crazy shit that they talk about. It's like he was also basically born with boxing gloves on. Like he might have been a phenomenal boxer and he might have had good cardio, but he was not a 50-0 boxer because he went for lots of runs. Did that help his cardio? For sure. But he was a 50-0 boxer because he was boxing for his entire life. He was born into a boxing family, and he basically lived in a boxing gym since the day he was fucking born. Right? And the same thing with Khabib. He was not a dominant UFC champion because he lifted light weights and worked with bands, even if that was all he did, which it's definitely not. He was a dominant UFC champion because basically from the day he was born, he was raised to be a dominant UFC champion. So the moral of the story, guys, stop comparing what you're doing to what you see a professional athlete do, or what you see, this person or that person do, because you are not this or that person. You need to figure out the best methods that work for you. Does this mean that you can't learn from these people. You can't, watch interviews or like watch videos about how they train and try to take pieces. Of course not. But you need to understand the intricacies of it. You need to understand, more behind the scenes. You need to understand the fact that this dude was born on a wrestling mat and you weren't. So the way he trains is not meant for average Joe getting into the gym for the first time. The way he trains is meant for kid born into a family whose father made him wrestle bears when he was 9 years old. And that's going to be a very, very different method than what you need. Now, again, I want to really reinforce before we wrap up, I'm not sitting here telling you that because you weren't wrestling bears when you were a child, you can't become a UFC champion. I'm not sitting here telling you that you can't be a professional fighter or anything like that. The one and only point I want to really reinforce here is that you should not be modeling yourself or your training after these people. Learn from them 100%. Take pieces from them 100%. But start looking for information that actually will apply to helping you outside of just the reasoning being, I saw this person say this one time, so that's how I'm going to train now. So guys, that's it. That's all. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. I hope you got some value from that. If you did, I would love to know what it is. Make sure to shoot me a message across any of my social media platforms. The links on how to do that will be in the show notes below. As always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will catch you on the next episode.